AI is in many senses. It's an approach of last resort.
Hello again. Welcome back to the Wild Business Growth Podcast, presented by Hippo Direct. This is your place to hear from a new entrepreneur or innovator every single Wednesday morning who's turning wild ideas into wild growth. I'm your host, Max Branstetter, digital marketing dude at Hippo Direct, and you can reach me at max@hippodirect.com for help using your podcast as a marketing tool. This is episode number 98, and today's guest is Janelle Shane. Janelle is the creator of the blog AI Weirdness and the author of the hit book, You Look Like a Thing and I Love You. She's been featured in Wired, Popular Science, The New York Times, and Fast Company. And as you can imagine, we dive into the deep and weird, strange, unsettling, bizarre, and of course, funny side of artificial intelligence. Let's get weird. Enjoy the show. Alrighty, we are here with Janelle Shane from AI Weirdness, who knows more about AI than Allen Iverson. Janelle, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great as well. Thank you so much for making the time today. And this is really neat because you have such a unique and really cool background. And to put it in perspective, I know a little bit about artificial intelligence, and I thought I knew a decent amount. And then I read your Wikipedia page, and I'm like, I pretty much need a definition for everything on this page. So this is going to be an interesting interview.
Oh, yeah, glad to define anything I'm working on. Science education is a large part of what I think it is I do.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, for perspective, back in episode 85, we had on Kat and Jethro Gilligan Toth from The Box of Oddities, which is a podcast that literally talks about the weirdest and most unusual stories out there. And I thought that would be the weirdest interview ever. But now that we have AI Weirdness on, I think you're going to give them a run for their money. So a lot to look forward to in this. We're going to get into AI awareness and your book as well. But before we get into that and kind of the world of artificial intelligence, what do you think you'd be doing if AI did not exist? And instead of artificial intelligence, we were left with lowly intelligence.
Well, I might be still blogging about something. I've had previous blogs. I had one where I was sharing pictures from an electron microscope, and actually it was pictures of all of my experiments that had failed, but on the microscopic scale, they looked really cool because you get these grand etching failures that look like the Grand Canyon, and they look like, there was supposed to be a park there. It had been completely, etched away into this great natural landscape. So I had a blog that was full of pictures of picturesque failures. I also had
Yeah.
a blog for a while that was like a Minecraft blog where I was riding a horse around and doing some quests. So yeah, I would be blogging about something. No idea what.
You're a natural blogger then. What is it you like about the blogging space and sharing your message and forms of entertainment in that form?
I really like the storytelling, the sharing. When I come across something that I think is, oh, this is so cool, this is so fun, this is such a good story, and I really want to tell it to other people. And if there's nobody immediately there, or I can't tell it to like 50 people at once, then putting it on a blog is one way to do that.
It is. It certainly is. And from your standpoint, what defines a good story? Because you hear so much about storytelling these days, but what's the difference from your perspective? And after telling so many unique and interesting stories for so many years, what makes it a gem from your standpoint?
It's learning about something new that maybe you didn't know about before, or seeing something you knew about before but in a different way. I mean, one thing I really like to try and do is have all of my things that I write make people feel better at the end of reading it. Either they learned something cool or they were entertained. So yeah, really the sort of wholesome, feel good, like there's enough stressful stuff out there. So I'm really trying
Right.
to, make it nice.
Absolutely. Well, that's a good mission to get behind. Okay, so that's in the this is going to be a hell of a sentence. That's in the fictional world where artificial intelligence does not exist. So back into the real world where you have done so much with AI. How did you get into AI and become interested in researching this giant and curious subject matter in the first place?
Okay, so in 2002, I was a entering freshman at Michigan State University, and this was back before neural networks and artificial intelligence were a commercial thing. Like, 2010 with Google Translate and all of these other, applications had not happened yet. Neural networks were this weird curiosity that people didn't know if it was going to amount to anything. And so when I went to this lecture by Professor Eric Goodman, like I had not heard of this before, and many people hadn't, but he would talk about this computer program that was learning how to solve problems via trial and error. So rather than being given explicit instructions, it was being given the goal, and then via a lot of trial and error, is supposed to try and reach a solution somehow. And what really struck me then was how bizarre these solutions could be. So if you told it to design, say, a car bumper that would crumple in just the right way in an accident, it would design something that looked like, it came out of like some kind of alien wasp or something, this weird organic structure, and it would crumple beautifully. And nobody really understood why it worked or what principles it was using. And then there would be other cases where they would give the algorithm a problem like, okay, sort this list of numbers. But what it would do instead of sorting the list, it was technically told just to minimize the number of sorting errors. So it would delete the entire list. And technically that's a solution to the problem. So seeing examples like this just made me go, wow, this is like nature, but it's on a computer. And I really want to get into learning about this. And so I did start doing research with that professor, and then looked at applying it to some optics work because I was also interested in lasers and light. And so I started using it in a nearby optics lab at the same university until we all understood the optics enough to realize that we didn't need the AI anymore. And that actually is the goal of solving the problem with AI in a lot of cases, is the AI is really a solution of last resort. And if you can solve the problem using some well-controlled equation or well-understood strategy, that would be better. But for problems that are way too complicated, AI can sometimes be a way to solve it. So in this particular case, the problem we were trying to solve was not very complicated, as it turned out. After a bunch of poking around trying to set the AI up correctly, we realized that, oh yeah, we can get the same effect just by like turning the power of our laser up and down, and it's having, nothing sophisticated needed here. So that kind of got me more into doing lasers and less into doing AI until around 2015, 2016, when neural networks were a thing again. And I came across a blog post where somebody had used a text generating neural network to generate recipes, like recipes for cakes, except that they would ask for all these ridiculous ingredients, and it would forget partway through the recipe that it was writing cake, and it would say, oh yes, and then add the shredded bourbon, and you'd be like, what? So that grabbed me again, and I said, oh, this is what, oh yeah, I remember how cool this was. So that got me into experimenting with it myself.
Holy cow. That's a you went on a decade and a half journey from AI to lasers back to AI and still doing stuff with lasers as well. So you've
Yeah.
had quite the journey there. Let's get to AI weirdness and the world of AI, and we'll discuss your book as well, of course. And so AI weirdness is your blog, and it's been featured everywhere from Wired to Popular Science to more. And you do these fun experiments like the recipes and some of the things you were talking about before, but these really out there experiments in the world of AI and neural networks. And if anybody listening just takes a minute to scroll through the blog or scroll through your Instagram, Janelle, I think you'll pretty quickly get a sense of how bizarre this world can be. So, to start us off here, just at a really, really basic level, because I, as mentioned, have very limited knowledge of artificial intelligence, at least to my knowledge. So, in your simplest words, what is the easiest way to understand what artificial intelligence actually is?
Yeah, so it's the actual word actual that's doing a lot of work here because people are using the term artificial intelligence to mean so many different things. Like they are using it for the artificial intelligence that's in movies, which is a completely different thing from the stuff that we have today. And then there are people who are calling their stuff AI. You're like, but is it really? Because this is, maybe just simple math. But when I was writing a book on artificial intelligence, and that was one of the first things I had to do was come up with a definition that I was going to use and explain, why I wasn't using all of these other definitions. So I went with what computer scientists generally mean when they say AI, which is a certain type of computer program called a machine learning algorithm. And this type of computer program in machine learning, instead of giving the program step by step instructions on how to solve a problem, you give it the goal and you let it come up with its own solution via trial and error.
Okay. And I can see in some of your examples how much trial and error there clearly is. So that's one way to think about it. What are the most common ways these days that we actually see AI in action out in the wild, whether it's stuff around our house or in cars out there? How is it most popularly used today?
If you have a smartphone, it's probably doing a lot of various AI functions right now, especially in the camera, actually, these days. So if you notice that smartphone cameras get pictures get better and better, that's not all hardware. In fact, the hardware for these cameras is pretty crummy, in terms of the raw picture quality. But these cameras are using a lot of AI to do heavy lifting and to figure out what the lighting should be like and to recognize, oh, that's a face. They probably want you to focus on that. And so you end up with these really beautiful pictures coming out of something that has no right being that good. And then there are the AIs that, if you're using Zoom and you've got a Zoom background of like a planet or something, how does it know what part is you and what part is the background? Well, it's using a single camera from your laptop, so it has no depth information. It just has one photograph. So it's guessing at the depth information just based on what it thinks people look like. And so you can see sometimes it'll get that wrong and your hand will disappear into the black void behind you or something. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
just normal for normal for AI. Your hands disappear into the void. I mean, you got to get all of this stuff that AI, if you have something that kind of works or fails in weird ways, you can maybe start to suspect that that's a machine learning algorithm behind it. So, like voicemail transcription, a lot of phones now will transcribe your voicemails for you, so you don't have to listen awkwardly to voicemails. I hate that, but it guesses wrong sometimes, and it's this algorithm that's doing an okay job, but doing it quickly and cheaply, sorting emails or making playlist recommendations on Spotify. Yeah, there's a ton of different ways in which people are interacting with AI right now, and often not even realizing it.
I was going to say those examples really help to put in perspective. And some of those examples there, like for example, if you're taking a picture with your phone of your Zoom call, you're literally using AI multiple times at the same time. So it's funny how much you can run into it these days. So that's kind of things that we're familiar with. But then I go and I look at your blog and I look at your Instagram and I see the craziest recipes and the craziest descriptions of different things I've ever seen. I mean, it seems like random words put together. And I see like cats with faces that aren't cat faces, things like that. And there's of course giraffes everywhere. So what is this world, this wild and weird world of AI weirdness that you have kind of made it your personal mission to introduce to more people of this side of AI? Can you shed some more light on that?
Yeah, well, I really am trying to poke hard at all of the different ways that these algorithms kind of show how limited they are and show how little they understand our world. So, if you think to your voicemail transcription, if you were to call up your friend and leave this really bizarre voicemail full of non sequiturs and like change subjects mid sentence, and the voicemail transcriber would probably make a bunch of mistakes. So you can think of my blog is like doing that in all these different forms. So, text generation algorithm might sound okay if you're using it to generate like really formulaic reports, but if you give it cookbook recipes to do, suddenly it's really showing that it has a limited memory because you can see, oh, it forgot what the ingredients were. We were making cake and now we're making, sausage, and that's what the algorithm thinks is going on.
Your
So
classic sausage cakes.
yeah, actually, I did an experiment once where I was training one of these on like these vintage Americana recipes, and one of the recipes, actual human written recipes in the training data, was ground beef fudge. So
That sounds I don't even know what to think about that. That's what it sounds like. I don't know.
yeah, I learned a lot about human weirdness during that experiment.
Yeah. So you've done so many experiments. In addition to the ones that you just mentioned, what are some of the most memorable that come to mind?
I really love it when there are people who interact with these neural nets. So I post something on my website, and then people take it and they say, "Oh, you posted a bunch of names of cookie recipes. I'm going to try and figure out how to make apricot dream bowls, or I'm going to have to figure out how to make grandma's spritches." So that's a really a lot of fun to see. Oh yeah, something physical like in this world exists because somebody saw my blog and said I'm going to spend hours of my life making this thing.
Oh my
The
God.
most dramatic example of that was this project I did that I called Skynet, which was a project where I was generating knitting patterns. And what I loved about that, knitting patterns, they're, sequences of text. It almost looks kind of like machine code a bit. But if you're a knitter, you can take this and turn it into some physical object. And so when people did this with some knitting patterns that one of these algorithms had generated, they were the most bizarre looking artifacts. Like you would have all of these random holes all over the scarf or whatever, and then there would be all this like ribbing that would branch and rebranch, and it would be weird and uncomfortable to knit. Yeah, it would look like, again, we're back with the alien wasp sort of
Of course. Yeah.
territory. But yeah, so I really loved that just to see. And then you would get three different versions of the same pattern depending on which human knitted it. And it turned out that was because the human knitters were all debugging the AI's code, essentially. They were debugging the knitting patterns to make them make more sense. So yeah, those kinds of projects I really enjoy.
Yeah, yeah, and you can just feel how much fun you have with it, and it's very entertaining for everybody who you share it out with as well. So what's it look like from your end? How do you, in basic terms, what is your process for doing one of these experiments? Is it just a matter of developing an algorithm and then feeding this just tons of inputs from around the web? Like what's that look like?
Yeah, so the algorithms that I work with are generally learning to copy examples of something. So if I want it to generate recipes, I have to give it lots of examples of recipes. So for the Vintage American Recipes project I did, I asked people to submit recipes that they had on hand, you know, from wherever they could find them. And I got a few hundred examples of, you know, recipes that had Jello in them and Cool Whip and shrimp and bananas all at the same time. Like, and then when I have this collection of examples, I give it to one of these machine learning algorithms, one of these AIs, whose goal is to learn how to look at the text and predict which letters come next. And so that's a lot of trial and error. At first, it's guessing mostly at random, and you could get random strings of characters or things that sound nothing like a recipe. But as it's refining its own structure, and it's doing all this, you know, I push go, I walk away, I come back later to see how it did. And when I come back and check, oh yeah, now it's learned the frequent words, it's learned to say Jello, it's learned to say, you know, congeal in this particular
Oh
example.
no, not congeal.
Yeah, there's some awful recipes in, you know, both the input and the output. And so then I'm generating a bunch of these. Okay, let's see what the neural net came up with. And then there's another part of the process, which is me saying, okay, I have, you know, essentially an infinite number of neural net generated recipes that I could share with people, but nobody's going to read all that. They're not all that interesting. So let me pick the most interesting ones and kind of explain to people what the neural net did and why it did this and what are the mistakes it's making and what is it picked up from human examples, and kind of put that into a blog post.
And you're masterful at it. And it makes me think of the movie Elf, where Buddy the Elf is making pasta and then puts all sorts of candy and sweets in it and mixes all together. And your kind of gut reaction is just like, oh, what the, like, that's just such a, like, not natural thing to see all these things together. But
Oh
that's
yeah.
like some of the recipes that come out of the experience you do are really like that.
And especially in the early days too, when I was using these neural nets that had almost no memory, and you know, it could only remember about, you know, 5 words at a time, something like that. And so it would try and do recipes, and it would say, you know, a teaspoon of sugar and a half cup of sugar and another teaspoon of sugar and a teaspoon of vanilla and more vanilla. You know, it wouldn't know which ingredients it had already used. So it would just keep coming up with likely ingredients and sometimes fill pages with lots of sugar. I once made a cocktail designing bot that was, for some reason, really fond of creme de cacao. And it came up with one cocktail called the Black Banana that had, I don't know, like a gallon of creme de cacao in it by the time you added it all up.
A gallon. Wow, that's a hell of a cocktail. I'm all for cocktails, but that yeah, you got to be in a certain kind of mindset for that. So a term that keeps coming up when you're talking about these examples and experiments is neural nets or neural networks. Can you explain what that is? I know it ties closely, obviously, to AI, but what is a neural network?
Yeah, so neural network is a kind of AI. So it's a kind of machine learning algorithm. In this particular one, it is kind of modeled after the way that brains work. So you even have virtual neurons that are connected to each other, and how they solve problems is all has to do with how these virtual neurons are connected. And so when you get this thing that's tuning itself via trial and error, that's what it's doing, suggesting the connection between neurons. And so it's not a perfect analogy, because there's a whole lot of complexity in like biological brains, biological neural networks that we don't even understand yet, and we definitely haven't captured in these neural nets. Each one of our real neurons is kind of like a complete neural net all by itself, and then we have billions and billions of these. So, you know, one of the biggest differences between our real brains and these virtual, you know, imitation brains is just scale. Like, we have way more complexity in our brains, and this is why you get these neural nets that do best if you give them a really tiny narrow problem they can focus all of their brain power on. You know, I sort of trying to guess roughly at what level our current artificial neural networks are at. I would say we're probably somewhere along around the computing power of an earthworm, something like that.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I probably won't be able to replicate your definitions that you've shared so far. So when people ask me in the future, I'm just going to say artificial intelligence is intelligence that is artificial, and neural networks are networks of neurons. Does that work for you? And do I get your stamp of approval on that?
Eh, no, it,
A little, no,
it's
we got
not
some
wrong.
Larry David sound coming up. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of that stuff is on your blog. And then you, at some point, realize that this deserves to be in book form and that you could really write a spectacular book on AI and kind of the pros and cons, the good and the bad, some of the stuff you've done with AI awareness as well. So your book titled "You Look Like a Thing and I Love You," which is a hell of a name in itself, is very, very cool, and tons of great press and accolades and all that jazz. But what can you tell us about the application of all this? Because obviously there's some great positive potential for AI in the future. But as you've demonstrated, there's lots of weirdness and bizarre things and unexpected things that come out of it. And so there's some cons as well. What would you say are the biggest things that you're excited about with AI in the future and that we might want to be a little bit concerned about, or at least keep a watchful eye on?
I would say underlying all of the stuff that we would want to watch out for is the fact that these are, worm level, they're really simple algorithms and they can only do exactly what they're told to do, and they don't understand, right and wrong. They don't understand implications of what they're doing. So it is so easy to accidentally build algorithms that copy, if they're learning by copying things, it's easy to build algorithms that are copying human behavior and not all the parts that we want them to copy. Like it doesn't know the difference between a good decision and a biased decision. It's going to try its best to learn how to replicate the bias because it thinks that's what it's supposed to do. And so I think where a lot of times people go wrong is they will think that just because a decision is made by AI, that it's somehow fair because it's based on math. But, it's more accurate to think of it as copying the humans. And so when you get cases like predictive policing, deciding where to send, which neighborhoods to send police to, or deciding who should get parole or not. Like a lot of the data that goes into training these kinds of algorithms has a lot of strong bias in it. Resume sorting is another one of these things where, we know from years and years of study that humans are biased when it comes to evaluating resumes or evaluating videos of people, job candidates. And so
Mm.
these algorithms are really sneaky about finding ways to replicate this kind of bias along with everything else they're trying to replicate. I mean, in some cases where the problem is really tough, like sorting resumes, the bias might be one of the clearest signals that they can pick up on. And so there's a lot of biased algorithms out there, and the problem is they're not just like in the research lab. They're making real decisions that affect real people's lives, and that's a problem. There's other algorithms that people are applying that are ill-conceived from the beginning that should never even be built. Gender detection is one of these where you can't tell somebody's gender just by looking at them. So no matter how long you spend training this algorithm, it's never going to work. And so you get a lot of cases of people who are building algorithms without thinking about these kinds of things first. They're not checking for bias. They're not thinking about bias ahead of time. They're not checking with people who have a lot of experience in these areas to say, oh yeah, don't build that, or oh, if you build this, it could harm these people in these ways. You better do it this way instead. So
Wow.
yeah, there's a lot to be cautious about.
Yeah, it's really crazy to think about. What about on the positive side, if you could think about the potential for AI to improve our lives, what comes to mind? What potential is there?
There's so many cool applications. I'm myself really into the creative applications. So can we use these to make really cool movie effects? Like neural net generated images tend to be hyper realistic detail and super good lighting, but very shaky understanding of geometry. So it is a weird and interesting aesthetic that I'd love to see played with more. There's people building tools now for music generation with AI that I think when they get to the point where artists, musicians can use these, I think we're going to see some really cool stuff come out. Another area I'm really excited is in kind of prosthetic communication. So, how do we get brains to interact with computers and with prosthetics in a more natural sort of way? And machine learning's made some really nice progress there. That's super exciting. I mean, there's a lot of scientists who are now using machine learning algorithms to shortcut some really tedious parts of their research, whether it's counting animals from space or counting crystals on a microscope slide or sorting through huge reams of astronomical data trying to figure out which of these pictures has like an interesting galaxy in it or something. So yeah, there's so many cool applications people are working on.
It's seemingly endless. And how about on the business side? Like, if you're a business owner and you are curious about AI, but not really sure the best way to go about it, how do you know if using some sort of solution with AI is right for you?
One of the things to really understand is that AI is in many senses is an approach of last resort. So if there's a way that you can use your own knowledge of the problem, whatever problem you're trying to to solve this problem, more understandably, that can be a better approach because AI often won't tell you how it solved the problem. And so you're left to guess whether it solved it for real in a useful way using real data, or if it somehow managed to pull some noise out of your data and it won't work when you move it to the real world. So there's all of these ways in which to be cautious when thinking about rolling out AI. I mean, there are definitely some applications for which we have not had good solutions before, and AI is it. Another area to be cautious in is if you're using these things to interact with people, whether that's sorting resumes. I mentioned why those are quite likely to be flawed. Like if you're considering using something for automatic resume sorting or to make judgments about people, understand that it's so easy for them to pick up bias that you really have to do your homework in saying, okay, has this company that's tried to sell this to me really looked at the bias, like not just said, oh, it's fine, it's not biased, but have they shown their data and actually done the experiments,
Right.
interacting, you know, in a lot of cases, you'll get AI solutions for things that are not as good as humans. Usually, we're training them to copy human performance. So it's unlikely that the performance is going to be on an individual basis better than humans. It may be cheaper, but you'll be giving up some performance. And then it's important to really ask, okay, where is that performance that we're giving up? And are we okay with that? We can put up with our voicemails being sort of imperfectly transcribed because that's convenient. But if this is somebody's medical records or somebody's personal data going into something that's really going to matter to them, maybe we don't want AI in charge of that.
Right. Yeah. And then it becomes a much more serious and personal matter to think about there. So lots to think about.
Yeah, and I don't want to say like AI is never going to be the good solution, but I think there is a lot to be said for caution and for a degree of skepticism, because I think people are selling AI for a lot of applications where this is actually not exactly the best approach.
Imagine you started your own podcast. You're growing your brand, sharing your expertise, maybe even your terrible puns, and meeting fascinating people. That is awesome. Now, imagine all the hours you've lost every week due to the podcast's demands. Not so awesome. I am your podcast producer. Email me at max@hippodirect.com. Let's switch gears a little bit. Let's get to a segment on inspiration and creativity. So, on your end, you have such a creative nature, and all the experiments you do are so creative. How do you come up with these ideas for your experiments and things you put out on your blog and put out into the world? How do you come up with that?
Sometimes people send me ideas, and that can be kind of fun because they'll be experts in some area that I haven't even thought about. And they'll be like, hey, did you know that the names of mushrooms are really weird? And I'll look at them,
I
oh,
did not.
wow, these are really weird. I should do something with that. So that's, and then sometimes it's from me reading and saying, oh, here's a new paper that came out. I really want to play with this algorithm and see what it can do. And so some of what I do is playing around with the latest and greatest out of the research labs.
So you keep your eyes and ears open from that perspective. Do you have any go-to places that you check out stuff to try to get new ideas, like whether it be magazines or research papers or stuff just on the internet in general?
I get a lot of my latest research from Twitter, actually. So I follow a bunch of
Really?
machine learning researchers out there, in particular ones that are really good at explaining their work and really good at posting demos, especially interactive demos.
I can imagine how helpful that is and how much it gives you new things to think about. So you kind of, in a way, you're able to crowdsource a lot of these ideas and or take them from the outside world and put your own spin on them, and then obviously use your expertise to do these really cool experiments. How about on the inspiration side? Is there anybody or a few people, anybody that comes to mind that was really impactful to you and helpful to inspire you to actually not just research all this stuff, but actually create your own blog and put it out there publicly and create your book and then go out there on your social media channels and share all this stuff because it's so unique and you do such an incredibly cool and unique job with it.
Yeah, so I guess I want to shout out David Ha with Google Brain, who's been blogging for a while on machine learning. He's also a machine learning researcher as well. And so, his research, other people's research, he often will post it in a really fun, engaging way. The blog post that got me thinking, oh yeah, I should do some AI experiments and put them on a blog was one done by a guy called Tim Brew, and he was inspired by another blog post by a guy called Andre Karpathy.
There's just blogs on blogs on
I know
blogs.
it's so many blogs. And there's so many great science communicators out there. Like I haven't done like YouTube communication, but if I did, it would be so fun to have a channel like Emily Grassley's. So her channel is called The Brain Scoop, and it's all museum science stuff, but it's so fun and wholesome, and you can really get how much fun she's having with it.
That is really cool. And what about on the hobbies side of things? So outside of your work and outside of your research, what do you do in your free time? What do you like to do to keep your mind fresh?
Yeah, so the blog that I'm doing and the book and all the associated writing with it, that I'm doing that in my free time. So my full-time job is as an optics research scientist, and I basically don't use any AI for that. So we've got a pretty big hobby with the AI blogging stuff. I'm also into writing. So I've got a science fiction story that's going to be coming out. My first professional sale of a science fiction story. Oh,
Oh, awesome.
I've got another story in the New York Times, and it was about feral self-driving scooters from the future, and that was a lot of fun. I also play Irish flute, so
I
there's
knew that
a
was coming. I did not know that was coming.
Oh, there is a blog post somewhere in my archives where I play a AI generated Irish tune on my flute to see what that sounds like.
Wow, that's okay. I gotta. You'll have to send me the link. I'll have to dive in and find that, and we'll share it because that's that's really cool. I've certainly never heard of AI inspired Irish flute before.
Yeah, there's been a few projects on AI inspired Irish flute, actually. I think it's one of the early music generation projects just because so much of the music has been in text format and available online. So people are like, oh, this is an easy data set to throw at a neural net and see what comes out. So there's actually several different algorithms doing that.
If there's one thing that's clear, it's whatever you think hasn't been done yet, it's been done several times before. There's always with new spins on it. So let's get to a fan favorite segment called the Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
The Wild Business Shout Out of the Week.
Wild Business Shout Out of the Week. So this is where we talk about brand or campaign that caught your attention. And we have the pandemic going on right now. And obviously there's all sorts of stuff going on in the business world and the advertising world as well. And so you have an example of what zoos are doing in different parts of the world during this time. Do you mind sharing what you have in mind there?
Yeah, so I was really inspired by this series of videos that zoos and aquariums started doing as soon as the quarantine started happening and as soon as they had to shut their doors. And suddenly this aquarium's empty, this zoo is empty. There are no visitors there, but the staff are still there, the animals are still there, the animals still, they live there. And so, what are you going to do all day? Well, it turns out some of these aquariums say, well, no people in the way, so let's take the penguins on a walk. And let's have the penguins go and check out the other exhibits. Let's see what fish they like. Let's have a penguin, you know, go on a hike through the woods. Oregon Zoo has these gorgeous little videos of these penguins hopping through this lush Oregon forest and kind of, you see the big boots of their keepers kind of tagging along. I think that's probably why they picked penguins, is you can keep up with them.
Right.
But then there's Mystic Aquarium. They have a tegu lizard and they take it around to visit various animals. So there's this brilliant video of them holding up a lizard to visit the sea lion. You see the sea lion doing like double, triple, quadruple takes, looking at this strange lizard that it's never seen before. It's the cutest thing.
We're going to have to use AI in the form of Google Translate to find out what these animals are actually saying and meaning in all this, because this is an incredibly unique time for them as well.
Yeah, and what I like about this is that, in the case of Shedd Aquarium, they had their penguins meet these beluga whales. And the beluga whales are northern hemisphere animals, and penguins are southern hemisphere animals. So this is a meeting between two species that may have never encountered each other before, like in the history of the planet. And suddenly here they are face to face in an aquarium. It's like meeting alien life right there. And you can see they're fascinated with each other.
I
And
thought you were going
so
to
it
say
is.
alien wasp again. I thought it was
Oh,
reference number 3 coming.
oh man, no, that would be Mystic Aquarium. For some reason, they posted this close up view of a Japanese crab and said, "Oh, hope here's hoping none of you have giant crabs in your house on Sunday." And we're all like,
What?
"Whoa, what?"
Okay.
They never did explain, but yeah, giant. So the giant crabs is alien-looking crabs is also a thing.
Well, that fits in the world of the peculiar as well. So let's get to the unusual. So here, think about pet peeves, quirks, weird talents. Not that we haven't discussed anything unusual so far, but to start us off, what is your biggest pet peeve?
About machine learning, I would say it's the people who kind of distort the truth of what these algorithms are capable of for some kind of end. So whether they have a puppet that they're pretending is a real robot and they're saying, hey, let's interview this robot and find out what she thinks about the future of humanity. What does the robot say? And then it says some line that they gave it. And then people freak out because they think that this robot is conscious and nobody realizes that I mean, not nobody, but there's plenty of people who don't realize that this is all a pre-scripted act. So
You're
then
talking
I
about
get,
ventriloquist, right?
yeah,
No.
or the equivalent of ventriloquism. So, Sophia the robot, for example, if you've seen this sort of, transparent domed, uncanny valley robot that's been on these various talk shows, and it's a puppet. The lines are written by human writers. This is not
Really?
AI, but I have met so many people who think that this is an actual algorithm that's reacting to things that are happening and that's coming up with these thoughts on its own. And then, they come to my talks or they visit my blog and they're like, oh, well, aren't you worried about the AI's feelings? And I would be if they were anything, like they are in science fiction, if they're anywhere near, human level or even dog level intelligence. But if we're talking to something that is super duper simple, like way, completely different ballpark than these science fiction AIs. But yeah, to see this line blurred, that's when you start getting people who think, well, we don't have to worry about AI as long as we tell it to be ethical and we tell it to value human life. And that's not a thing that today's AI can remotely understand. So yeah, pet peeve.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it definitely is presented in a way that makes it seem like something. So that it's you got to pause and think about it. It's you never truly know what to believe. How about quirks? So is there something about your personality that maybe a coworker or friend or family member calls you out on that's a little bit quirky?
Mm, Sneezing fits every morning for some reason. So I
Just
had a
in the morning?
Yeah, I had a early class, I think it was in college, it said, okay, if she ever gets to 20 sneezes in a row on one class period, the whole class gets extra credit.
All right, that's not what I expected. That well, bless you. I'm
Thank
sure
you.
you're probably very sick of hearing that by now. But
Oh, I needed that this morning. I'll save it. Yeah, save it for
yeah,
tomorrow
okay,
morning.
yeah, exactly. You can stock up on the bless yous, and then how about weird talents? So I'm not going to let you use your Irish flute example because you already used that one. But other than that, and other than your blog, what would you say is something that you're really talented at, but maybe doesn't necessarily have an impact on your work? So it could be, another instrument. It could be you're really good at memorizing something. It could be just quick at identifying, actors and actresses in movies.
Well, up till like last month, I would have said, oh, I can bake sourdough bread, but
Oh,
turns out that's not for me anymore. So,
yeah. Who hasn't baked sourdough bread by this point, right?
yeah, but I was making sourdough bread years ago, but yeah, yeah.
The
So
sourdough
everyone,
hipster.
yeah, I know. That's
Yeah, no, that's a talent. You did it first. They're all copying your idea.
man, and their loaves look better than mine too. It's not fair.
I don't know. Well, I can't speak to that, but if we can get an AI inspired no, I'm just kidding.
Ooh, now there's an idea. Have
Yeah.
people send in their picture of their loaves and see what the AI
Oh, there we
version.
go. All right.
Uh,
I'll you can send me a giant check for that. Thank you very much. No, I look forward to seeing it. But let's wrap up with some rapid fire Q&A. You ready for it?
sure.
All right, let's get wild. What is the weirdest thing you've ever seen that we can credit to AI?
The generated images of the Great British Bake Off. which look like a cross between the actual Great British Bake Off and like some kind of alien scribbled dimension where everybody is floating orbs of flesh and bread is maybe the ceiling and the floor and everything else. And it's horrifying, but also strangely comforting at the same time because the textures and color scheme are the Great British Baking Show.
So you can catch the next episode of the Great. Yeah, that's pretty out there. What would you say is your favorite recipe? Not a recipe that you've done as an experiment, but favorite recipe in general, like something that you actually enjoy cooking,
Oh,
other than sourdough.
huh. So big fan of chicken pot pie actually, and its little
Oh yeah.
individual crusts and throwing the sourdough back in there. Tried sourdough crust for the first time, and yeah, it's got this really nice, almost a cheesy flavor to it. Goes super well with chicken pot pie. Ah, love it.
Oh
Fresh
my
out of the
God.
oven. Love it.
I'm craving that. Yeah. I'll never get sick of chicken pot pie. What object or device that we see commonly would you say has the best algorithm or is the best at machine learning, if you will?
The ones that are doing color correction on our cell phone cameras are pretty impressive. I'll take a picture with my cell phone side by side with like my actual like fancy camera, and the cell phone picture often looks much better straight off of the device because it's already figured out what the ideal picture should look like and changed reality such that I took that picture. Like I am just waiting for the cell phone to come out where you can just kind of like wave it around the scene and it actually composes the shot for you. It can just,
Oh
this
yeah.
technology is just about there.
That would be awesome. Yeah, that would be really cool. It is amazing. That's always the hot new thing. Whenever there's a new iPhone comes out, oh, here's the, best camera ever. And then
Mm.
last one, you do a lot of work with optics and lasers on the research front. So I'm sure there's, we could obviously do a whole podcast on the laser side of things. What is the application of lasers that you get most excited about in terms of future use of this stuff?
One I'm working on right now is studying the brain and figuring out how the neurons in real brains are interconnected. So the part of it I'm building is a computer controlled hologram that can steer a bunch of laser beams inside a brain and do experiments on which neurons tend to fire together. So that's really cool because there's so much we're learning just on the neuron level of how these brains work, and that looks really cool to see where that goes.
That's very cool. Well, appreciate your work on it and all the work you do. It is such a unique and super cool and just fascinating world. So, Janelle, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your stories and experiments and sourdough recipes. Where is the best place for people to connect with you, to connect with your blog, and to buy your book?
Oh, buy my book, which is called You Look Like a Thing and I Love You: How Artificial Intelligence Works and Why It's Making the World a Weirder Place. And you can buy it anywhere books are sold. If you can buy it from your local indie bookstore, they could really use the help right now. So that would be awesome. I am probably most active on Twitter. If you want to find me on social media, I'm at Janelle C. Shane. And then my blog is on Tumblr. It's aiweirdness.com. And you can also find me on Instagram occasionally, and I'm on a Mastodon instance as well. So you can find all that on my website, janelleshane.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Your stuff is endlessly fascinating. And this is really cool. I feel like we've come full circle in a way because way back on episode 33 of the podcast, we had on Susan Bennett, who, believe it or not, was the original voice that became Siri on iPhone.
Mm.
So she's a voice actress and became Siri. And that was kind of an example of AI and Siri, obviously, how it used as an example of that in machine learning. And I had no concept of the whole world of AI and kind of the applications and the behind the scenes of it. And you are more than knowledgeable on all that. So thanks again for discussing that. And then final thing here, final thoughts. The stage is yours. It could be a line. It could be a random AI line, whatever you want. Send us off here.
Okay, it's never trust an AI.
Of course, that is how the saying goes. Thank you, Janelle, for sharing your crazy cool experiments and one-of-a-kind story. And thank you, wild listeners, for tuning into another episode. If you want to hear more wild stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite app and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. You can also check us out on Good Pods, where you can find all the podcasts your friends, family, and other favorite people are listening to. In addition, dive into our marketing and business growth resources at hippodirect.com/blog and hippodirect.com/newsletter. That newsletter is the Hippo Digest, and it's your place for wild marketing ideas every single week. And, of course, if you're not connected already, or even if you are, come say hey on your favorite social media channels at the handles Hippo Direct and Max Branstetter. Until next time, let your business run wild.
Bring on the bongos!